Yes, just because they joke sometimes and fuck every 2 seconds does not mean that they are an actual good couple. Invincible and Adam Eve's relationship is a prominent part of the entirety of the Invincible series, and unfortunately, they are not very good. This being the consequence of their overall dynamic and the writing of both characters, because yes, if one character is badly written while the other is well written, it damages the overall writing of the relationship, obviously. And unfortunately, in their specific case, they are both quite bad, and it's a shame. We will be going through their relationship and pinpoint where this couple falls, and while they bore the ever-living shit out of me every second of the way. Let's get onto it without pause. Before dissecting the relationship, it's important we start with establishing what makes an actual good couple. The standard definition would probably be two individuals forming a strong connection with one another, and showcasing it through words and actions, caring, supporting each other, enjoying spending time together. Basically, they feel comfortable enough to become emotionally vulnerable. That's the surface level depiction of what an actual good and impactful couple is supposed to be. I think it goes deeper than that. Compelling couple would be two individuals developing a dynamic, developing their own characteristics, changing because of the other. The couple creates something that neither character possesses individually. When the two characters enter a scene, they should be captivating. Their personalities should produce a distinct ambiance. Their beliefs should interact, or their ideals should clash. Their flaws should expose each other, and their strengths should create new possibilities for development. When you actually think about it, it is exactly like friendships or other types of relationships, like rivalry, partnership, all use many of the same ingredients as a compelling romance: chemistry, trust, conflict, dependence, and mutual development. They don't differ much, they're fairly adjacent, minus the romantic part, obviously. Romance adds exclusivity, intimacy, and the possibility of a shared future. Those additions increase the emotional stakes, but they don't automatically make the dynamic more interesting. It's also important to answer three main questions when judging a relationship. First, why do they specifically choose each other? What traits made Eve choose Mark, and what makes that connection feel irreplaceable? Because if those same traits could apply to hundreds of possible partners, then their bond isn't particularly special. Second, where is the friction? Healthy couples can't disagree without becoming toxic. They can have different ambitions, morals, communication styles, or ideas about their future. They can agree on most things too, but if they never face any meaningful problem, their on-screen dynamic is going to suffer from the absence of spark. At that point, the other traits of the relationship and the characters themselves have to not completely suck and take the relay. And finally, how do they transform each other? A relationship should expose flaws, force difficult decisions, and create development that neither character would experience alone. Personally, that's probably the most important criteria because it can completely shatter and reshape the core identity of both characters. With all of that said and done, let's get to the stars of the show. Mark Grayson. Let's just say he's an okay character in my quality board. Being the MC of Invincible, Mark is fundamentally an earnest person, wanting to help people in need without ever having to kill. After all of the tragedies that occurred, Chicago, Angstrom, and Mark & Co., he becomes hardened and vows to never hesitate when it comes to his family. His whole arc was about never becoming like his father, and the more he tries to do good and protect who he loves, the more that idea is concretized. This should be a pretty good character arc. So why is Invincible in only okay? Well, apart from the fact that his power scaling is as fucking atrocious as his Riz,
if we could work together, but like as people, not work.
His whole arc's premise makes no fucking sense. I won't dissect the entire arc here, but Mark's fear of becoming his father has always felt underdeveloped. Nolan's brutality came from his commitment to Viltrum. He viewed humans as inferior, conquest as necessary, and even his family as secondary to that mission. Mark rejects that entire worldview and fights Nolan because he values humanity and the people he loves. So, if the show wants us to believe Mark could potentially become his father, it needs to establish the bridge between them in the first place. Becoming angrier, more violent, or willing to kill is not enough. Without that ideological shift, he may become more brutal, but he does not truly become Omni-Man. Season 4 made him slightly better, but without plus. Though I won't get into that yet, as the most annoying part about him is how he moves in his relationship with Eve. This guy is on sad emo mode 24/7. I feel like every time we see them talking together and having a normal conversation, situation, there is not one instance where he isn't bitching about something. Now, I hear you, Mark is living through it, and reasonably so. He wants and needs closure after all the turmoil. However, that still doesn't diminish the fact that this is literally every instance that they spent together. Problem is, it's always the same thing. Shit happens and Mark cries about it to Eve. Rinse and fucking repeat. There is no real lesson being taught from their conversations. Eve says the same shit every time. Is this even helping? I mean, I guess it's his girlfriend, so with that fact alone, it probably is. But is anything she's saying really helping? She says the same kind of shit you would expect someone to tell you every time. Is Mark finding these discussions on his roof helpful? It also doesn't help that he never asks if Eve's okay in return. Yes, I know that there was that one time, but let's be honest, it was just a mediocre attempt at addressing the problem before continuing it anyways. If these discussions could at least give the audience some sort of morale, or allow Mark to think more introspectively about his life and have him change in any kind of way, these would be actually really helpful. And instead, it's always the same thing. Every time Mark and Eve are together, I'm already rolling my eyes because I know how repetitive it's gonna get. And the fact Mark comes out unchanged every time they have these discussions just demonstrates they are fucking useless. So I keep doing them if they serve no purpose. Is it to showcase their love and unity? We've had plenty of scenes like these already. At least he had that one discussion with her dad about her protection and safety, but let's not act like that also doesn't really make much sense. From Eve's father's side, it served a purpose at least. He's always minimized her powers and Eve in general, so it's okay to believe he would have no critical thinking on her capabilities. However, for Mark and Eve, Mark being concerned for Eve makes sense, but the tension is weakened by how vaguely her limits are defined. She has already revived herself once, and with matter manipulation powerful enough to make her one of the strongest characters we've seen, the show needs to establish what can actually kill her. Otherwise, every scene asking us to fear for her safety feels artificially tense. But granted, that's another question. In any case, I don't know what happens in the comics, but I am 80% sure this plotline won't go anywhere anyway, so I don't expect much of Mark. On to Eve now. Eve was a pretty good character in the earlier season before being rendered a PNG for Mark to hold on to say the least. Her journey to find what she really wants to do in life was actually a trope I've been wanting to explore before in an animated series. It resonates deeply with individuals that are lost and that don't know yet what to do in life. Just because of that, she was my favorite character back in season 1 and 2. Now, however, oh god, Eve. What the fuck are you doing? Now Eve is basically Mark's therapist for the entirety of the rest of the seasons. She goes through no real arc, no real development, her fight with Conquest was cool but without plus, and we're still supposed to believe she could lose to anybody. And her involvement in her relationship doesn't fucking help. Eve only comforts. It's okay to comfort, but like I said before, if there is no friction, if there are no differences between these two characters that could compensate for the lack of intrigue in their moments together, then they must have other redeeming qualities. And Eve has none. The problem remains the same. Mark is sad and Eve comforts him with the typical "you're not alone" speech. A speech like that can work, but it never seems to make much of an impact. Mark rarely reflects on what she tells him, applies it later, or changes the way he handles the next crisis. And that's a big problem. They tell each other a lot of things on screen, but those conversations barely leave any residue beyond their love growing, I guess. And even that growth feels abstract. We know they love each other because the show repeatedly tells us they do. They kiss, they worry about each other, they say emotionally supportive things, and they fuck every 2 seconds. We get it. But what has Eve actually learned from loving Mark? What belief has he changed? What weakness has he exposed? What decision has she made because of something he taught her? What are all these discussions worth if they create no change? More importantly, what does Eve actually want anymore outside of Mark? Earlier in the series, she had an independent purpose. She was trying to understand how she wanted to use her powers, what kind of hero she wanted to become, and whether she could build a meaningful life outside the expectations placed on her. She had goals that existed before Mark entered the room and would have continued existing if he left it. Now, most of her narrative relevance depends on what is currently happening to him. Mark is losing himself, so Eve comforts him. Mark is in danger, so Eve worries about him. Mark is losing himself, so Eve reminds him that he's still a good person, etc, etc. That is how the relationship reduces her agency. Eve still makes decisions, but increasingly those decisions are responses to Mark's story rather than actions driving her own. She reacts to his trauma, his moral decline, his danger, and his choice choices. She barely generates conflicts or objectives that force Mark to enter her world. Some people will point to her losing her powers or the dinner table conversation as proof that the show still focuses on her. Those scenes acknowledge that Eve has problems, but acknowledgement is not sustained development. A character arc requires those moments to alter her direction afterward. What does she decide because of them? What changes in her ambitions? What does she pursue differently? Where are the lasting consequences? Give her one emotional scene and then returning her to the same supporting role is the minimum. Her relationship with Mark does not expand her character, it compresses her into a function. The worst part is that Eve's old character arc could have created actual friction between them. Her search for purpose should have given her priorities that occasionally conflicted with Mark's. Maybe she wants to use her powers to rebuild communities, while Mark keeps dragging her back into superhero battles. Maybe Mark believes her powers create an obligation to fight, while Eve refuses to let the responsibility consume her entire life. That would give her something to defend, something she would choose over Mark, something Mark would have to understand, support, or challenge instead. Instead, her clearest ongoing purpose becomes helping Mark survive the night. She used to be a character searching for what she wanted to do with her life. Now the answer seems to be dating Mark and performing unpaid therapy. I guess, Eve. By the way guys, this is my first video. If you could like, subscribe, and most importantly comment your thoughts about the video, it would greatly help me in the making of future content. Thanks. So, what does that tell us about their overall relationship? What is the takeaway from all this? Well, simple. They are boring. They are just boring as a couple. I've reiterated it many times now, but there is nothing really interesting about them. Good attempt answering the questions I posed as criteria for a good couple, but even then it'll get boring. Specificity is the only criteria where they have a somewhat convincing foundation, which is just the fact they had similar lives, had a few moments together, and where unsurprisingly, Eve was there to comfort Mark. Even when they're not together, the curse continues. Both of their characters would have truly been better off as single as a Pringle. When it comes to friction, there is, but almost none of it permanently changes anyone. I'm not even sure they have chemistry anymore. They were way more entertaining to watch in season 1 than in the later seasons. And while they have changed in their own ways, none of it was really because of one another. And you can give Eve some credit for influencing Mark at the end of season 3, but that development never feels uniquely tied to their relationship. Mark is already being shaped by his family, his friends, his failures, and the accumulation of everything he has survived. Eve contributes to that process, but she does not force a realization or decision that only she could have produced. That distinction matters. A compelling relationship should transform both characters in a specific way. If Eve were removed from that moment, Mark would still have several other reasons to reach roughly the same conclusion. So yes, she influences him, but the relationship itself does not create a distinctive transformation. She reinforces development that was already happening instead of becoming the cause of something new. That's basically for friction and change at the same time. What else can I talk about? Honestly, not much. Their relationship is the same old, same old. They have no event that really makes an impact on their relationship, and if you want to get into the whole pregnancy plot with Eve, well, what the fuck was the point of Eve becoming pregnant? The pregnancy plot introduces many material that should alter how they view responsibility, their future, and each other. Instead, the relationship returns to its previous state so quickly that an event this significant leaves almost no residue. It would have been more interesting if they continued the plotline, but the plot just introduces potentially transformative material, but does not allow the consequences to meaningfully reshape their behavior or future conversations. So none of it is useful. In short, Mark and Eve's relationship is a snooze fest. Their interactions are predictable, they always tell each other the same thing, both of their characters become as interesting as a wet blanket upon contact with one another. Mark and Amber were far more compelling to watch. They were far less compatible as actual partners, but dramatically their relationship had more going on. Mark's secrecy created tension, his unreliability had consequences, and Amber forced him to confront how badly his superhero life affected the people around him. Their relationship was clearly doomed, but at least it revealed something about both characters and changed the way they behaved. Mark and Eve are healthier and more compatible on paper, but compatibility alone does not create a compelling storyline. Amber created conflict, consequences, and actual character development. She was not necessarily the better girlfriend for Mark, but their relationship was absolutely the better written one. Sorry, Eve. Even Rex and Ray were better than this shit. Oh well, I can only pray season 5 does better because this is just not it.